They said the boy was broken. They said he was a lost cause, trapped inside a mind that refused to speak. His father, a billionaire who could buy anything on earth, looked at his own son like a defective product he couldn't return. But Sarah, she was just a waitress at a roadside diner, barely scraping by. She didn't have a degree, and she didn't have money, but she had a secret. When she finally unlocked the boy's voice, the father's reaction wasn't a hug. It was something that would leave Sarah standing in the middle of the restaurant, sobbing uncontrollably. This is the story of how a spilled glass of water changed 3 lives forever. The rain in Seattle didn't just fall, it hammered against the glass trying to break in. Inside the Rusty Spoon, a high-end but aging diner on the edge of the financial district, the noise of the storm was drowned out by the clatter of silverware and the low hum of conversation. Sarah Jenkins wiped down the counter for the 50th time that morning. Her uniform, a pale blue dress that had seen better days, smelled faintly of maple syrup and stale coffee. She was 32, but the dark circles under her hazel eyes made her look older. Life hadn't been kind to Sarah. 3 years ago she had a house, a husband and a daughter named Lily. Now she had a studio apartment the size of a closet, a mountain of medical debt, and an empty space in her heart where her family used to be. Table 4 needs water, Sarah. Stop daydreaming. The manager Rick barked from the pass-through window. Rick was a man who believed kindness was a business expense he couldn't afford. Sarah nodded, grabbing a pitcher. On it, Rick. She walked toward table 4, the prime booth by the window. It was usually reserved for the high rollers who spilled over from the tech offices across the street. Today it was occupied by a man who looked like he owned the entire block, and a boy who looked like he wanted to disappear from the earth. The man was Daniel Sterling. Everyone knew the name. CEO of Sterling Dynamics. A man whose net worth was discussed on the news more often than the weather. He was handsome in a sharp, terrified way, jaw-tight eyes glued to his phone, radiating a stress so palpable it felt like static electricity. Across from him sat the boy, Leo. He looked about 7 years old. He was wearing a polo shirt buttoned to the top and hair combed so severely it looked painful. But it was his eyes that stopped Sarah. They were wide blue and utterly vacant. He was staring at a fork on the table, rocking back and forth in a tiny rhythmic motion. I don't care what the board says, Daniel hissed into his Bluetooth earpiece, ignoring his son entirely. If the merger fails, it's on your head. Fix it. Sarah approached cautiously. Refill, sir. Daniel didn't look up. He just waved a hand dismissively, a gesture one might use to swat away a fly. Sarah turned her attention to Leo. Hi there, she said softly, her voice dropping to that gentle register she used to use with Lily. Would you like some apple juice, or maybe a chocolate milk? Leo didn't blink. He didn't stop rocking. He won't answer you, Daniel said, finally looking up. His eyes were cold grey steel. He doesn't talk. Just bring him water. He doesn't talk, Sarah asked, a pang of sympathy hitting her chest. Not a word. Not since he was 4. Daniel said, his voice laced with a mixture of exhaustion and resentment. Autism. Selective mutism. Stubbornness. Take your pick. The doctors charge me $5,000 an hour to tell me they don't know. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty door. She looked at Leo again. The boy's hand was twitching now. He was reaching for the salt shaker. Leo, don't touch that, Daniel snapped, snapping his fingers in front of the boy's face. Sit still. Leo froze. The look of terror that flashed across his face was heartbreaking. He pulled his hand back so fast he knocked his heavy glass of water over. Crash. The glass didn't break, but the ice water flooded the table, soaking the tablecloth, and dripping onto Daniel's pristine Italian suit trousers. The diner went silent. Daniel stood up so fast his chair screeched. "For God's sake, Leo!" he shouted. The entire restaurant turned to look. "Can you not do one simple thing? Can you not just sit there without causing a disaster for 5 minutes?" Leo shrank into the booth, pulling his knees up, covering his ears with his hands. He opened his mouth in a silent scream, his face turning red eyes, squeezed shut. But no sound came out. It was a scream of pure frustration, trapped inside a throat that wouldn't work. Rick, the manager, came rushing over with a towel. "Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry, Sarah. Get the mop, move." Daniel was brushing water off his pants, his face purple with rage. "This is ridiculous. I can't take him anywhere." He looked at his son with an expression that Sarah knew well. It wasn't just anger, it was disappointment. It was the look of a man who had given up. Sarah didn't go for the mop. Instead, she dropped to her knees. Not to clean the floor, but to get to eye level with Leo, who was trembling under the table trying to hide. "Sarah!" "The mop!" Rick hissed. "Give me a second," Sarah said firmly, her voice surprisingly commanding. She ignored the billionaire looming over her. She ignored her angry boss. She crawled slightly under the table. The water was soaking into her tights, cold and uncomfortable, but she didn't care. "Leo," she whispered. The boy was rocking harder now, hyperventilating. Sarah knew this panic. She had seen it in her own daughter when the thunderstorms got too loud. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a plain white paper napkin. She didn't try to touch him. She didn't try to hug him. Instead, she took a pen and drew a simple, jagged line on the napkin, like a mountain range. She slid it toward him. "That's how you feel right now, isn't it?" she whispered. "Spiky, messy." Leo stopped rocking for a microsecond. He peeked through his fingers. Sarah drew another line next to it, a smooth, waving line, like the ocean. "This is how the water feels. Cold, wet. But see, it flows away." She placed the pen on the floor midway between them. The tension in the diner was thick. Daniel Sterling was watching, baffled. "What are you doing?" "Get out from under there." "Shh," Sarah said, holding a finger to her lips, looking directly at the billionaire. Daniel was so shocked by the waitress shushing him that he actually shut up. Under the table, a small, trembling hand reached out. Leo grabbed the pen. His grip was tight, white-knuckled. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at the paper. He jammed the pen down and drew a dark, chaotic scribble over Sarah's mountain. He pressed so hard the paper tore. He looked at her eyes wide, waiting for the scolding, waiting for the "don't do that." Sarah smiled. "Wow," she whispered. "That is a lot of noise for a piece of paper." She took another napkin. She drew a stick figure with a sad face. She pointed to herself. Then she drew a stick figure with steam coming out of its ears. She pointed up at Daniel. For the first time, the corner of Leo's mouth twitched. "I have a secret, Leo," she whispered, leaning in so only he could hear. "I don't like talking sometimes either. Words are heavy. Sometimes they get stuck." Leo stared at her, mesmerized. "But," Sarah said, tapping the table rhythmically. "Tap, tap, pause, tap. We don't always need words." She tapped it again. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Leo hesitated. Then with his index finger, he tapped the floor. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Sarah's heart soared. "The water is okay, Leo. It's just water. It dries." She slowly backed out from under the table. She stood up, brushed off her knees, and finally faced Daniel Sterling. "He's ready to come out now," she said calmly. "But please don't yell. The noise hurts him more than it hurts you." Daniel looked at this waitress, this woman with messy hair and water-stained knees, as if she had just spoken in tongues. He looked down at his son. Leo crawled out from under the table and sat back in the booth. He wasn't crying anymore. He was clutching the torn napkin with the scribbles. Daniel stammered, his business arrogance momentarily deflated. "I didn't—" "I'll get that mop now, Rick," Sarah said, turning to her boss, who stood with his mouth open. As Sarah walked away to the kitchen, she felt Daniel's eyes boring into her back. She didn't know it then, but she had just passed a test she didn't even know she was taking, and the consequences were going to be far more dangerous than a wet floor. 3 days passed. Sarah assumed she would never see Daniel Sterling or his son again. Men like that didn't come back to places where they had been publicly embarrassed. They went to private clubs or hired private chefs. But on Thursday at 11 a.m. sharp, the bell above the door chimed. Sarah froze mid-pour. Daniel Sterling walked in. He was wearing a different suit, charcoal grey this time, but the Bluetooth headset was still there, and trailing behind him, clutching a sketchpad against his chest like a shield, was Leo. The diner was busy. The lunch rush was starting early. Daniel walked straight past the hostess stand, ignoring the "Please wait to be seated" sign, and headed for table 4. He sat down, checked his watch, and looked around impatiently. When he locked eyes with Sarah, he nodded, a sharp, singular nod. "Come here." Sarah took a deep breath, smoothed her apron, and walked over. "Welcome back, Mr. Sterling. Leo. Coffee, black, and whatever he eats," Daniel said, gesturing to Leo. "Grilled cheese, I guess, and cut the crusts off. If there is a single crust, he won't touch it." "Hello, Leo," Sarah said, ignoring the father's rudeness. Leo looked up. He didn't smile, but his eyes locked onto hers immediately. He placed his sketchpad on the table. It was open to a blank page. "He's been difficult," Daniel muttered, scrolling through emails on his phone. "The nannies can't handle him. He threw a vase yesterday. Dr. Pendergast says it's a regression phase. I don't have time for regression phases. I have a company to run." "Maybe he's just bored," Sarah suggested, taking out her order pad. "Bored he has a playroom filled with $10,000 worth of educational toys." Daniel scoffed. "He's not bored. He's broken." Sarah gripped her pen tight. She wanted to slap the billionaire. Instead, she leaned down to Leo. "I like your pad," she said. Leo pushed the pad toward her. He picked up a crayon blue and held it out. "Sarah, order up at table 6, Rick yelled across the room. "1 second, Sarah called back. "I'm paying for your time," Daniel said without looking up. "Ignore him. Sit." "I can't sit, sir. I have other tables." Daniel pulled a money clip from his jacket. He peeled off a $100 bill and slapped it on the table. "Now you have 1 table. Sit." Sarah looked at the money, then at Rick, who was fuming in the corner. Then she looked at Leo's hopeful face. The money didn't matter. The boy did. She sat. "Okay, Leo," she said. "What are we doing today?" For the next 20 minutes, the diner faded away. Sarah and Leo engaged in a bizarre, silent game. Leo would tap on his water glass with a spoon ding. Sarah would have to match the pitch by humming. Ding. Ding ding. Then Leo switched. He drew a circle. Sarah drew a square. He drew a happy face. Sarah drew a cat. It wasn't random. Sarah realized quickly that Leo was testing patterns. He was checking to see if she was paying attention to the rules he was inventing in his head. "You're very smart," Sarah whispered. "You're building a code, aren't you?" Leo looked at her, his eyes shining. He nodded. Once. It was the first deliberate communication he had made to anyone in months. "What is this?" Daniel asked. He had finally put his phone down. He was watching them with a mix of skepticism and fascination. He's just making noise. No, Sarah said, not breaking eye contact with the boy. He's conducting. Listen to the rhythm, Mr. Sterling. It's in 3/4 time, like a waltz. Daniel frowned. He listened. Leo tapped the glass. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. He listens to classical music in the car, Daniel said, his voice softer. Chopin. It's the only thing that stops him from screaming. He's musical, Sarah said. He thinks in music because words are too chaotic for him. Words lie. Music doesn't. Sarah picked up a spoon. She gently tapped the side of the sugar dispenser. It made a dull thud. She shook her head playfully. No good. She tapped the salt shaker. Ch-ch. Better. Leo's mouth opened. A tiny raspy sound came out. It wasn't a word. It was a giggle. A rusty, unused giggle. Daniel Sterling froze. He looked at his son as if he had just seen a ghost. Did he just... Sarah. The moment shattered. Rick was standing at the table, his face red. I don't care how big the tip is. You have 5 other tables waiting. Mrs. Higgins has been waiting for her tea for 10 minutes. Get up. Now. Sarah stood up immediately. I'm sorry, Leo. I have to go. Leo's face fell. The light went out of his eyes. He reached for her hand, his small fingers grazing her apron, but she pulled away. I'm sorry, she whispered. She stays, Daniel said, standing up to face Rick. He was a foot taller than the manager and radiated power. I will buy every meal in this restaurant if I have to. She stays with my son. This isn't a daycare, Mr. Sterling, Rick snapped, trying to maintain authority in his own diner. And she is an employee. Unless you're hiring her as a babysitter, she waits tables. And right now she's doing a terrible job. Daniel looked at Sarah. He looked at her worn-out shoes, her tired eyes, and the way his son was looking at her like she was a lifeline. Fine, Daniel said. He pulled out a business card. It was thick black with gold lettering. Meet me at this address tomorrow, 9 a.m. What? Sarah asked, confused. You're fired, Rick spat at Sarah. If you're going to ignore your job, don't bother coming back. Rick, please, I need this shift, Sarah pleaded. You heard the man, Daniel interrupted. You're fired, which means you're free. He shoved the card into Sarah's apron pocket. My house. Tomorrow. Don't be late. I'll pay you triple what this grease trap pays you. Daniel grabbed Leo's hand. Come on, Leo. We're leaving. Leo resisted for a second, looking back at Sarah, then slumped and followed his father. Sarah stood in the middle of the busy diner, stunned. She had just lost her job. She had been insulted by her boss, and she had been propositioned by a billionaire to do what babysit she looked at the card. Daniel Sterling, CEO, the Sterling Estate, 4,400 Cliffside Drive. She looked at Rick, who was pointing at the door. Out, Sarah, now. Sarah untied her apron. She dropped it on the floor. She looked Rick in the eye. It's not a grease trap, Rick. It's a place where people come to be fed. Maybe you should remember that. She walked out into the rain. She was unemployed, terrified, and intrigued. She had no idea that walking into 4,400 Cliffside Drive would uncover secrets that would threaten to destroy her, and that Daniel Sterling was not looking for a nanny. He was looking for a miracle, and if she failed to provide it, she knew he would destroy her too. The Sterling Estate wasn't a home. It was a museum where happiness went to die. Sarah stood at the massive iron gates of 4,400 Cliffside Drive, clutching her purse. The rain had stopped, but the grey Seattle sky hung low and heavy. She buzzed the intercom. Name? A voice crackled metallic and unwelcoming. "Sarah Jenkins. Mr. Sterling asked me to come." There was a long pause, then a heavy clank as the gates swung open. Sarah walked up the long, winding driveway. The house loomed ahead, a modern monstrosity of steel concrete and floor-to-ceiling glass. It was beautiful architectural and completely devoid of warmth. It looked like an Apple store, not a place where a 7-year-old boy lived. The front door was opened by a woman who looked like she had been carved out of granite. She wore a grey suit that was impeccably tailored and a scowl that seemed permanent. "I am Mrs. Gable, house manager," she said, blocking the entrance. She looked Sarah up and down, her eyes lingering on Sarah's scuffed sneakers and the faint stain on her coat. "Mr. Sterling is on a conference call with Tokyo. He is not to be disturbed. You are the former waitress." "I'm Sarah," she said, standing straighter. "I'm here for Leo. Mr. Sterling has hired many specialists for Leo," Mrs. Gable said, stepping aside reluctantly to let Sarah in. "Speech pathologists, behavioral therapists, child psychologists, all of them had PhDs. None of them lasted more than a month. I do not expect you to last the week." "I'm not a therapist," Sarah said, stepping into the foyer. The floors were marble, polished to a mirror shine. It was freezing inside. "I'm just a friend. Leo is in the West Wing, the playroom. Do not touch the art. Do not make a mess. And under no circumstances are you to go upstairs to the master suite." Sarah followed the housekeeper through the silent halls. There were no family photos, no toys on the floor, no signs of life, just abstract paintings that looked angry and expensive, sculptures that looked sharp. They reached a white door. Mrs. Gable opened it. "Leo, your guest is here." Leo was sitting in the middle of a room that was bigger than Sarah's entire apartment. It was filled with toys, drones, robotic sets, a climbing wall, a massive train set. But Leo wasn't playing with any of them. He was sitting in the corner, facing the wall, lining up matchbox cars in a perfectly straight line. Blue, red, blue, red. "I'll be in the kitchen," Mrs. Gable said. "There are cameras in this room. We will be watching." The door clicked shut. Sarah didn't rush him. She took off her coat and sat on the floor about 10 feet away. She didn't speak. She just reached into her bag and pulled out something she had bought at the dollar store on her way over a tub of cheap neon green Play-Doh. She opened the lid. The smell was salty and distinct. She took a lump out and rolled it into a ball. She tossed it gently in the air. Leo didn't turn around, but his hand paused over a red car. Sarah rolled the dough into a snake. She made a hissing noise. "Shh!" Leo turned his head slightly. "This house is very quiet, Leo," Sarah whispered to the Play-Doh, not to him. "It's too quiet. It needs some squish." She threw the Play-Doh snake at the wall. Thwack! It stuck there, a bright green blob on the pristine white paint. Leo whipped around, his eyes wide with horror. He looked at the camera in the corner, then at Sarah. He was waiting for the sirens, the yelling. Sarah laughed. She threw another piece. Splat! "Your turn," she whispered. Leo looked at the cars. He looked at the dough. He stood up, trembling. He walked over to Sarah. He didn't take the dough. Instead, he took a deep breath and kicked the tower of blocks Sarah had started building. Crash! He looked at her, challenging her. "Good," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "Chaos. I like it." For the next 4 hours, they didn't speak a word. But they communicated constantly. They built a fort out of the expensive couch cushions, which Sarah was sure was a firing offense. They turned the train set into a disaster zone, where Godzilla, a stuffed bear, attacked the city. Sarah realized quickly that Leo wasn't unable to understand. He was terrified of making a mistake. In this house of glass and marble, everything was perfect. He was the only thing that wasn't. By 1 p.m. they were exhausted. They were lying on the floor staring at the ceiling. "You miss her, don't you?" Sarah asked softly into the silence. She felt Leo stiffen next to her. "Your mum," Sarah clarified. "I bet she was soft. I bet she smelled like flowers." Leo sat up, his breathing hitched. He crawled over to a bookshelf and pulled out a heavy book. He opened it to a page. It was an encyclopedia of flowers. He pointed to a picture of a white lily. "Lily," Sarah said. "That's my daughter's name." Leo shook his head aggressively. He pointed again. "Not the name," Sarah guessed. "The smell." Leo nodded. He buried his face in the book, inhaling the scent of the paper, imagining it was the flower. "What is going on here?" The voice boomed from the doorway. Sarah scrambled up. Daniel Sterling was standing there. He looked tired, his tie loosened, holding a tablet. He looked at the cushions on the floor, the Play-Doh on the wall, and the disheveled state of his son. "I'm paying you to teach him to speak, not to turn my house into a pigsty," Daniel snapped. "He's playing Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, standing her ground. "Children learn through play, not through flashcards." "He looks distressed," Daniel said, walking over. "Leo, get up. Fix your shirt." Leo stood up immediately, buttoning his collar with shaking hands. The light that had been in his eyes moments ago vanished. He became the robot again. "He was showing me a flower," Sarah said, trying to salvage the moment. "He likes lilies. Did his mother like lilies?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel's face went pale, then red. "That is none of your concern," Daniel said, his voice dangerously low. "You are here to perform a service. Do not pry into my personal life. Do not mention his mother again. Is that clear? I need to know what traumatized him if I'm going to help him," Sarah argued. "Silence is a shield, Mr. Sterling. What is he protecting himself from?" "Get out," Daniel said. "What, for the day. Get out. I'll see you tomorrow. If you bring up Vanessa again, you're done." Daniel turned his back on her. He looked at his son, who was staring at the floor. Daniel reached out to pat Leo's head, but stopped inches away, his hand hovering. He couldn't do it. He pulled his hand back. "Clean this up, Leo," Daniel said softly, almost sadly. Sarah grabbed her purse and left. As she walked down the long driveway, she realized 2 things. First, Daniel Sterling was a man in deep pain, and second, the ghost of Vanessa was the key to everything. A month passed. Sarah fell into a routine. Every morning at 9 a.m., she arrived at the glass fortress. Every day she chipped away at the wall Leo had built around himself. She brought music into the house. She brought a small, battered ukulele she had found at a pawn shop. Leo didn't play it, but he would lay his ear against the wood while she strummed, feeling the vibrations. She brought food, real food, not the chef-prepared, nutrient-balanced meals Leo usually got. She brought greasy pepperoni pizza. She brought sticky buns. She taught him that getting messy was okay. One Tuesday it rained harder than usual. The thunder shook the glass walls. Leo was under the table in the library, his safe spot. Sarah was sitting next to him, reading Harry Potter aloud. "Daniel is hosting a gala tonight," Mrs. Gable announced, sweeping into the room. She looked stressed. 20 investors. The future of Sterling Dynamics depends on this. Sarah, you need to get Leo ready. He is to make an appearance at 7 p.m. for appetizers." "He hates crowds," Sarah said, closing the book. "The noise will set him off." "Mr. Sterling insists," Mrs. Gable said. "He wants to show the investors that the rumors about his son being unstable are false. Dress him in the blue suit." Sarah looked at Leo. He was hugging his knees, rocking. "I'll handle it," Sarah said. That evening the house was transformed. Caterers in black vests swarmed the halls. String quartets played in the foyer. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. Sarah had dressed Leo in his suit, but she had let him keep a small, smooth stone in his pocket, a worry stone they had found in the garden. "Just squeeze the stone if you get scared," she whispered, straightening his tie. "I'll be right there in the corner." Daniel entered the room. He looked like a movie star in his tuxedo, but his eyes were frantic. "Is he ready?" Daniel asked. "He has to say hello." "Just a wave. Can he do that?" "He's a child, Daniel, not a prop," Sarah said, using his first name for the first time. Daniel paused, looking at her. Sarah was wearing a simple black dress she had bought from a thrift store, but she had pinned her hair up. She looked elegant. "I know," Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "But these vultures, they think I'm weak because I'm a single father with a special needs child. They think I'm distracted. I need to show them I have control." "Control isn't love," Sarah murmured. Daniel didn't respond. He took Leo's hand. "Come on, son. Showtime." They walked out onto the mezzanine overlooking the grand living room. The chatter stopped. 20 pairs of eyes looked up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel announced, his voice projecting confidence he didn't feel. "Thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce my son, Leo." Leo stood by the railing. The height seemed to dizzy him. The lights were too bright. The smell of the lilies in the massive floral arrangements below hit him like a physical blow. Lilies. Sarah saw Leo's breath hitch. She saw his hand go to his pocket, squeezing the stone. "Say hello, Leo," Daniel prompted, through a gritted smile. Leo opened his mouth. No sound. One of the investors, a heavy-set man with a loud laugh, shouted up, "Cat got your tongue, son! Or is he as quiet as the stock market this week?" The crowd laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. Leo flinched. He stepped back. He looked at the lilies. He looked at the laughing faces. Suddenly the memory hit him. Sarah saw it happen, the dissociation. Leo wasn't on the balcony anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere terrifying. He started to scream, but it wasn't the silent scream from the diner. This was a high-pitched, wailing shriek of pure terror. He fell to the floor, thrashing, clawing at his tie, clawing at his throat. "Leo!" Daniel knelt down, trying to restrain him. "Leo, stop! Everyone is watching!" The investors gasped. Whispers erupted. "He's crazy. Unstable. Just like his mother." Sarah didn't care about the investors. She ran. She pushed past a waiter, sprinted up the stairs, and threw herself onto the floor next to Leo. "Back off!" she yelled at Daniel. "He's ruining everything!" Daniel shouted, panic making him aggressive. "He's having a panic attack. Get away from him!" Sarah shoved the billionaire backward. She wrapped her arms around Leo, pinning his arms to his sides so he wouldn't hurt himself. She pressed her cheek against his sweating forehead. She started to hum, the same low, vibrating hum she used in the diner. "The water flows," she whispered into his ear. "The mountain stands. You are the stone. You are the stone." The screaming turned into sobbing. Leo buried his face in Sarah's neck, his tears soaking her dress. The room below was dead silent. Daniel stood up, adjusting his tuxedo, his face a mask of humiliation and fury. He looked at his guests. "The boy is unwell. Excuse us." He gestured to Mrs. Gable to clear the room. Then he looked at Sarah, who was rocking his son on the floor. "Get him to his room," Daniel whispered, his voice shaking. "And then come to my office." Later that night, the house was empty. The staff had cleaned up the debris of the failed party. Sarah knocked on the heavy oak door of Daniel's office. "Enter." Daniel was standing by the window, staring out at the dark ocean. He held a glass of whiskey. He didn't turn around. Is he asleep? Yes, Sarah said. I stayed until he drifted off. You embarrassed me tonight, Daniel said. I saved him tonight, Sarah countered, stepping into the room. Those people were laughing at him, and you were more worried about your stock price than his terror. Daniel spun around, his eyes blazing. Do you think this is easy? Do you think I like parading him around? I'd do it to protect his future. If I lose this company, what happens to him? Who takes care of him when I'm gone? He doesn't need a trust fund. Daniel, he needs a father, Sarah shouted back. I don't know how to be a father, Daniel roared, slamming his glass down. Not to him. Not since Vanessa died. The silence that followed was heavy. She died 3 years ago, Daniel said, his voice breaking. Car accident. I was driving. It was raining. Leo was in the back seat. He saw everything. He was the one who tried to wake her up. She was covered in... He stopped, choking back a sob. He hasn't spoken since that night. He thinks it's his fault. Or maybe he thinks it's mine. Sarah felt the anger drain out of her, replaced by a profound sadness. He associates the smell of lilies with her funeral, Sarah realized. That's why he panicked tonight. The flowers. Daniel looked stricken. I didn't even think. He slumped into his chair, putting his head in his hands. The powerful billionaire looked like a broken boy. I can't fix him, Daniel whispered. I look at him, and I see her. And I see my failure. Sarah walked around the desk. She hesitated, then placed a hand on his shoulder. You're not failing him because you're sad, Daniel. You're failing him because you're hiding. You're hiding behind your money, behind this house, behind your work. Daniel looked up at her. His eyes were red. For the first time, he really saw her. Not as a waitress or an employee, but as a woman who had walked into his broken life and refused to leave. What do I do? He asked. Come say goodnight to him, Sarah said. Just sit with him. Don't talk, just be there. Daniel stood up. He looked at Sarah with an intensity that made her breath catch. Thank you, he said. He walked past her to the door. Sarah watched him go. She felt a strange flutter in her chest. She was falling for the broken boy, and she was terrified she was falling for the broken father too. But just as things seemed to be turning a corner, the doorbell rang. It was 11 p.m. Sarah followed Daniel to the foyer. Daniel opened the door. Standing there, soaked from the rain, was a woman. She was stunning, blonde, sharp features, wearing a trench coat that cost more than Sarah's life earnings. Bianca? Daniel asked, confused. The woman smiled, a predator, baring its teeth. She walked in, brushing past Daniel. She saw Sarah standing in the hallway. So this is the help? Bianca asked, her voice like crushed velvet. The one causing all the trouble. Sarah, this is Bianca, Daniel said, his posture stiffening. My fiancé. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Fiancé. I've been in Paris, Bianca said, walking over to Sarah and circling her like a shark. But I heard about the little disaster tonight. It seems, Daniel, that you need a woman's touch in this house. A real woman. Not whatever this is. Bianca turned to Daniel. I'm back, darling, and I'm going to fix everything, starting with the staff. Sarah looked at Daniel. He looked conflicted, trapped between his past arrangement with Bianca and the raw honesty of the night he just had. Sarah stays, Daniel said quietly. Bianca's eyes narrowed. We'll see. The atmosphere in the house changed overnight. If it was cold before now, it was glacial. Bianca moved in. She wasn't just a fiancée. She was a business merger. Her father owned the bank that financed Sterling Dynamics. Daniel's engagement to her wasn't about love, it was about survival. Bianca hated Leo. She didn't say it, but she showed it. She would accidentally trip over his toys. She would turn the music up loud when he was trying to sleep. She commanded the staff with an iron fist, and Mrs. Gable, terrified of Bianca's influence, fell in line. Sarah became the enemy. "She's a gold digger, Daniel," Bianca whispered over dinner one night, loud enough for Sarah to hear. As she cleared the table, Bianca had insisted Sarah serve dinner, demoting her from therapist to maid. "Look at her. She's trying to play mommy. It's pathetic." "She's helping him," Daniel said, though his voice sounded tired. "Leo is improving." "Is he?" Bianca laughed. "He still doesn't speak. He still acts like a feral animal. You need to send him to that boarding school in Switzerland, the one I told you about. Out of sight, out of mind." Crash. In the kitchen, Sarah dropped a plate. She stormed into the dining room. "He is not sending his son away." Bianca smiled, taking a sip of wine. "Speak when spoken to servant." "I am not a servant," Sarah said, her hands shaking. "And Leo is not a problem to be solved. He is a grieving child." "Daniel," Bianca said coolly, "control your staff, or I will call my father and tell him the merger is off." Daniel looked at Sarah. "Sarah, please, go to the kitchen." "Daniel," Sarah pleaded. "Go," he said, avoiding her eyes. Sarah retreated, tears stinging her eyes. She knew Daniel was cornered, but she also knew Bianca was dangerous. 2 days later, the trap was sprung. Sarah was in Leo's room, helping him tie his shoes. "Sarah!" Daniel stood in the doorway. Beside him was Bianca, looking triumphant. Behind them were 2 police officers. "What's going on?" Sarah stood up, instinctively moving in front of Leo. "My diamond engagement ring," Bianca said, holding up a bare finger. "It's missing. It's a 5-carat heirloom, valued at $200,000. "I haven't seen it," Sarah said. "We checked the security footage." Bianca lied smoothly. "The cameras in my room were conveniently disabled. But we found this in your bag." One of the officers held up Sarah's tote bag. He reached inside and pulled out the ring. Sarah gasped. "No, I didn't put that there. She planted it. Arrest her," Bianca said, smirking. "Daniel, look at me," Sarah cried out as the officer grabbed her arm. "You know I didn't do this. I would never steal from you." Daniel looked at the ring. He looked at Sarah. He looked at Bianca. The ring was in her bag. "Daniel," Bianca said, softly placing a hand on his chest. "She's a grifter. She used the boy to get to you, and now she's robbing us blind." Daniel remained silent. His face was unreadable. "Daniel!" Sarah screamed as the handcuffs clicked. Leo was watching. He was sitting on the bed, his eyes darting back and forth. He saw the police. He saw Sarah crying. He saw the ring. He remembered. Earlier that morning, he had seen Bianca in the hallway. He had seen her go into the coat closet where Sarah kept her bag. He had seen the glint of the diamond. Leo stood up. He walked toward the police officer. "Leo, sit down," Bianca snapped. Leo ignored her. He grabbed the officer's leg and shook it. "Let go, kid," the officer said. Leo shook his head violently. He pointed at Bianca. Then he pointed at the bag. He made a motion like he was sneaking something in. "He's having an episode," Bianca said quickly. "Take her away." Leo looked at his father. Daniel was watching his son. He saw the desperation in Leo's eyes. He saw the intelligence. Leo ran to the desk. He grabbed a piece of paper and a crayon. He scribbled furiously. He ran back to Daniel and shoved the paper into his hand. Daniel looked at it. It was a drawing. Stick figure Bianca. Stick figure bag. An arrow moving the ring from Bianca to the bag. "It's just a drawing, Daniel." Bianca scoffed. "He doesn't know what he's doing." Daniel looked at the drawing. Then he looked at Bianca. "He saw you," Daniel said softly. "Don't be ridiculous." Bianca laughed. "He's a retard, Daniel. He doesn't see anything." The room went dead silent. Daniel's face transformed. The fatigue vanished, replaced by a cold, hard rage that was terrifying to behold. "What did you call him?" Daniel asked. Bianca realized her mistake. "I just meant he's not cognitively—" "Officer," Daniel said, his voice like ice. "Release Ms. Jenkins." "But the ring," the cop stammered. "My son just gave a witness statement," Daniel said. "And I believe him. I believe him. Over her." "Daniel, you can't be serious," Bianca shrieked. "My father will ruin you. He'll pull the funding, you'll be bankrupt by Monday." Daniel walked over to Sarah. He motioned for the officer to unlock the cuffs. He took Sarah's rubbed wrists in his hands, checking for marks. Then he turned to Bianca. "I don't care about the money," Daniel said. "Get out of my house. If you ever come near my son or Sarah again, I will spend every penny I have left to make sure you spend the rest of your life in prison for filing a false police report." Bianca stared at him, mouth open. She looked at the police who were now looking at her with suspicion. She huffed, spun on her heel, and stormed out. "Take the ring as evidence," Daniel told the officers. "I want to press charges for attempted fraud." The police left, taking the ring. Sarah stood there, rubbing her wrists, trembling. Daniel looked at her. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't stop it sooner." But Sarah wasn't looking at Daniel. She was looking at Leo. Leo was standing in the middle of the room. He was breathing hard. He looked at Sarah. He opened his mouth. His jaw worked, his throat muscles straining against 3 years of silence. "Sir." Daniel froze. Sarah froze. "Sarah." The word was raspy, broken and quiet, but it was there. Leo looked at his dad. "Daddy." Daniel dropped to his knees. He didn't care about his suit. He didn't care about his dignity. He crawled across the floor and wrapped his arms around his son. "I heard you, Leo," Daniel sobbed. "I heard you." Sarah watched them, tears streaming down her face. She turned to leave to give them their moment. "Stay," Leo said. One word, clear as a bell. Sarah stopped. She looked back. Daniel held out a hand to her. She walked over and knelt down with them. The billionaire, the waitress, and the boy. A strange, broken, beautiful family sitting on the floor of a glass fortress that suddenly felt a little bit warmer. The morning after the arrest, the sun rose over the Sterling estate, but it brought no warmth. Bianca hadn't been bluffing. Her father, a vindictive banking tycoon, froze the credit lines for Sterling Dynamics by 8 o'clock a.m. By 9 o'clock a.m., the stock price was in its freefall. When Sarah arrived at the gate, the security code didn't work. She walked up the driveway to find Mrs. Gable standing in the foyer with 2 suitcases. "He fired us," the housekeeper said, her voice trembling. "All of us. He can't pay us next week." She paused, looking at Sarah. "But you were right about the boy. He hummed this morning. In 20 years I never heard a sound in this house until you came." Sarah found Daniel in the library. The room was a disaster of crumpled papers. He was sitting on the floor looking like a man who had gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. Leo was sitting next to him, coloring on the back of a worthless stock certificate. "Welcome to the ruins," Daniel laughed bitterly. "Banks pulled the financing. The board ousted me an hour ago. The house is leveraged. The cars are leased. By the end of the week I will have nothing." He looked at Leo with devastating guilt. "I promised his mother I would give him the world. Now I can't even give him a roof." "You didn't ruin his life, Daniel. You saved it," Sarah said fiercely. "You chose him over the money." "Power doesn't buy groceries, Sarah," Daniel shouted, pacing the room. "I am a failure. I have debts, lawsuits, and no future. You should go. I can't pay you." Sarah didn't leave. She walked over and slapped him hard. The sound echoed in the empty room. "Don't you dare!" she said, her voice shaking. "Don't you push me away with that self-pity. I was a waitress, Daniel. I know how to survive on nothing. You're the one scared of being poor, not me. Look at your son." Daniel looked. Leo had put down his crayon. He walked over to his father, reached into his pocket, and pulled out the smooth worry stone Sarah had given him. He placed it in Daniel's hand. "Safe," Leo whispered. It was his third word. Daniel stared at the stone, then at his son. The tension in his shoulders broke, and he exhaled a long, shuddering breath. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." The next 3 days were a blur of chaotic downsizing. Daniel sold his watches to pay the staff's severance. They packed only what mattered and moved into a small, peeling rental house in a quiet suburb. It was a far cry from the mansion, but it had a big oak tree in the front yard. It was Tuesday evening when the final blow came. A knock on the door revealed a process server who handed Daniel a thick envelope. "You've been served." Daniel read the first page and slid down the doorframe, his face pale. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "It's Bianca," Daniel choked out. "She's not just suing for money. She's petitioned Child Protective Services to take Leo." Sarah snatched the paper. The allegations were vile, unstable environment, mental breakdown, neglect. "She wants to destroy me," Daniel wept. "She knows he's the only thing I have left." "She won't," Sarah said, her eyes turning dangerous. "She thinks you're weak because you're broke. She forgot that you built an empire from scratch. You have a voice, Daniel. And more importantly, now so does Leo." The hearing was a spectacle. Headlines screamed, "Fallen Tycoon fights for autistic son," as Daniel walked up the courthouse steps alone. Inside, Bianca sat flanked by 3 high-priced lawyers looking like a grieving saint. Daniel sat at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting suit, his hands shaking until he touched the smooth worry stone in his pocket. The proceedings were brutal. Bianca's lawyers painted Daniel as a manic, negligent father who had squandered a fortune and dragged a special needs child into poverty. "Your Honor," the lead attorney argued, "Mr. Sterling is bankrupt. He lives in a dilated rental. The state or a placement arranged by the Banks family is the only humane option." The judge, a stern woman, peered over her glasses. "Mr. Sterling, do you have a defense?" Daniel stood up. He locked eyes with Sarah in the gallery, drawing strength from her presence. "It's true, Your Honor." Daniel said, his voice quiet but steady. "I lost the money. I lost the company. By the standards of my old life, I am a failure. But my son didn't need a CEO. He needed a dad. For 7 years, I was too busy buying him toys to actually play with him. Now we have nothing but each other, and for the first time, he is safe." "Sentimental speeches don't pay for therapy," Bianca's lawyer interrupted. "He doesn't need therapy." A small voice cut through the room. The courtroom froze. The voice came from the chamber door. The social worker stood there, stunned, as Leo walked out. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in jeans and a dinosaur t-shirt. He walked right past Bianca, who stared at him in shock. Leo stood before the judge. He looked small, but his chin was up. "Leo," the judge said softly, "you're not supposed to speak out of turn." Leo pointed a finger at Bianca. "She lies." Gasps erupted in the gallery. "Leo!" Daniel stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "No," Leo said firmly. He looked at the judge. "Dad reads to me. Sarah plays Play-Doh. We are happy." He struggled with the word, but he pushed it out. Then he turned to his father. "Don't be sad, Daddy. We have the tree." He was talking about the oak tree in the yard of their tiny rental house. The judge took off her glasses. She looked at Bianca, then at the brave little boy. The court's primary concern is the emotional well-being of the child, she stated. It appears that for the first time this child is communicating. Poverty is not a crime, Miss Banks, but weaponizing a custody case, that is, case dismissed. Custody remains with the father. Daniel dropped to his knees, sobbing, and Leo rushed into his arms. Sarah ran from the gallery, wrapping them both in a hug. They had won. 6 months later, the Seattle rain was a gentle mist as Sarah walked toward the building that used to be the Rusty Spoon. She hadn't been back since the day she was fired. She stopped at the door. The old peeling sign was gone. In its place hung a sleek, hand-painted wooden board, Leo's Kitchen. Food for the soul. Sarah pushed the door open. The greasy interior was gone, replaced by warm wood floors and sage-green walls. A corner was dedicated to a play area, stocked with books and cans of neon Play-Doh. The place was packed with families. Table for one. Sarah looked up to see Daniel at the host station. He wore an apron over a flannel shirt, flour dusting his cheek. He looked tired, but his eyes were alive. "Daniel!" Sarah gasped. "What is this?" "I liquidated the last asset. I had my 401k. He grinned. "I bought the place from Rick. I'm the cook. Turns out I make a mean grilled cheese." He pointed to the floor. "And Leo? He's the manager." Sarah looked. Leo was moving from table to table with a pitcher of water. He poured a glass for a little girl, gave her a high five, and smiled. He was speaking in short sentences, laughing and completely unafraid. Daniel walked around the counter and took Sarah's hands. "I learned something, Sarah. I was good at making money, but I was miserable. This is hard work. My back hurts, but I wake up every morning excited." He reached into his apron pocket and pulled out a set of keys. "I didn't buy this place for me. I bought it for us. You're the heart of this place, Sarah. You're the reason Leo speaks. You're the reason I'm still standing." He pressed the keys into her palm. "Sarah Jenkins, will you be my partner in business and in everything else?" Sarah looked at the keys, then at the man who had lost millions to find himself, and the boy who had found his voice. Tears of pure joy streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Daniel kissed her, and the diner erupted in applause. Now Leo ran over, squeezing between them for a group hug. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the three of them. They didn't have a mansion or a private jet, but as Sarah held her two boys tight, she knew the truth. They were the richest people in the world. And that is how a spilled glass of water and a few scribbles on a napkin changed everything. Daniel lost his fortune, but he gained a family. Leo found his voice because someone finally stopped to listen. It proves that sometimes you have to lose the life you built to find the life you were meant to live. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. What would you do if you were in Daniel's shoes? Would you give up the millions for your child? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story that moves you. Thanks for watching.